Today we're going to be looking at how populations grow and why they don't outgrow their area, and such a thing called the carrying capacity. Please make sure that you understand what a carrying capacity is, as well as some factors that may control or determine what the carrying capacity is. Remember, a species produces offspring to carry on traits and ensure survival of species. Rate at which they produce offspring varies on the species. All organisms need to produce offspring in order to ensure survival of the species. However, different organisms will produce different rates of offspring depending on their type, which we will see later. Some will produce many offspring at a time, as most of the offspring will die. Some only have about one or two every couple of years to ensure slow population growth. The rate at which organisms produce offspring varies, as they don't want to produce too many offspring, as it could end up leading to starvation, competition, or other such problems. So, the question is, how does an organism's population know when it's time to slow down reproduction rates? That we're going to see in the next slide. When does a species population stop growing? Most organisms don't want to reach overcrowding, as starvation will occur. Because of that, there is a set line that scientists call to determine when an organism population has stopped growing. Every ecosystem has a carrying capacity. A carrying capacity is the maximum amount of organisms an ecosystem can handle. The carrying capacity is determined as the number of organisms an ecosystem can handle. Most organisms try to avoid this number, as if reproduction still occurs, overcrowding and starvation will occur, like in this group of bacteria. Once crossed, populations crash. Here's a sample graph. So scientists are able to determine what the carrying capacity is of a population by watching population growth trends. This next slide is going to show you a sample graph of how you can determine the carrying capacity of a population. If we look at this graph, we see a healthy population, where on the y-axis is the population, and on the x is time. Over time, it gets close to an invisible line, in this case represented by the dashed line. This dashed line is the carrying capacity, and most organisms try not to cross it to avoid crashing. What creates the carrying capacity? A carrying capacity is determined by a few factors: waste, the amount of space, the amount of food, etc. But what determines the carrying capacity? Surely there has to be some sort of guiding way to determine how many organisms can be in an area without causing problems. What happens when a population crosses the carrying capacity? Massive population crash. Many organisms go extinct. Carrying capacity is determined by waste, space, food availability, and other such qualities. The amounts of these will depend on how many organisms the ecosystem can support. Obviously, these change from time to time throughout the year. What about humans? We have yet to reach our carrying capacity. The population of humans is at 7 billion people and growing every year. Because of that, many experts are worried about, are we going to hit our carrying capacity soon, or do we even realize the potential of our carrying capacity? As we know, species, once they've crossed that line, end up crashing and heading to major extinction. This graph here shows the human population over the last 2,000 or so years. As you can see, it's within the last 200 years that there's been an explosive, exponential population growth with no carrying capacity in sight. This can be either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. It may mean that we could cross it at any moment. One thing is for certain, however: at the rate that we are going, the planet cannot sustain this level of population increase. Your question for this weekend is how you would handle the idea of humans crossing or reaching the carrying capacity. What are some ideas, inventions, or systems that you could come up with to be able to come up with a way to make sure that humans are able to keep going, or at least find a sustainable carrying capacity? Keep in mind, China's idea of having one child per couple was an ineffective method, and you can't use that as an idea. Also keep in mind that you may want to consider other species in this. As humans increase, the amount of resources for other organisms, such as whales, fish, trees, etc., lose out in having their resources as well. I'm curious to see what you come up with. See you Monday.